want to thank our sponsors.
JustForPolice.com, a grassroots service reward program established for police officers buying and selling real estate. Jiu-jitsu50.com, a lifestyle brand training resource for law enforcement officers, providing technique videos, blog articles, promoted courses, and the latest in apparel and gear. Jiu-jitsu50.com. Storm Training and Consulting, offering courses in firearms, tactical emergency medicine, and the Tactical Rescue Challenge. Stormtraining.org. Manchester Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, aka Bushido, located in Manchester, Connecticut, a staple in the jiu-jitsu community for over 20 years. ManchesterBJJ.com. Welcome back to the Code Podcast. Rob Magao here. I got episode 19 now, and probably the most important episode I've done, not to minimize the others, but obviously, unless you've lived under a rock, one of the biggest challenges facing our country right now is we're in a lot of civil unrest. Well, there's protests everywhere, and the entire law enforcement career is being looked at and under a microscope. There are many states now passing laws and bills to restrict police involvement in things and limit what we do. And in Connecticut now, we have a bill that's being announced, the Police Accountability Bill. I believe it's 3471, that is being looked at over the next few weeks. And there's a lot of people calling me, emailing me, wanting to know about this bill. It's 65 pages long. How can I even understand it? And today I brought on two guests. One will be my co-host, a longtime friend of mine, worked with him many years as a police officer, Detective Tom Ganley. Tom, how are you?
Good. How are you, Rob?
I'm doing excellent. Thanks for coming on. So normally I have my co-host, Rich McKeegan. He felt this was important enough that he should kind of step to the side and let somebody that kind of understands the whole topic here to help me ask the questions. So Tom and I are going to be talking to probably a person that needs no introduction to Connecticut law enforcement, 40 plus years in the game here now, and literally wrote the book that we all follow, the field manual, the red book as we call it. And I would say probably spent the majority of his life focused on alleged police misconduct. And he just did I thought a brilliant 32-page rebuttal on this whole bill, or I wouldn't say rebuttal, but just his own personal feelings about it based on fact. Attorney Elliot Spector, how are you, sir?
I'm well, thank you, Rob.
You're very welcome. So in a nutshell, just so you can give our viewers and listeners a little background on you, what is it that you do? How long you've been doing it? And what qualifies you to write a 32-page rebuttal about this bill?
Well, I started as a police officer in the city of Hartford, Connecticut in 1971. And I stayed there for 9 years. Things weren't going great with regard to the politicians and the way they were running the police department. And a lot of us left at that point. I was going to law school in the last few years of my career, became an attorney, and when I finished my law work, I began specializing in representing police officers dealing with police issues. Toward the end of law school, I was retained by Judge Milton Fishman to start doing some training for police officers. So essentially, since about 1980, I have been training police officers, and shortly thereafter, when I passed the bar, representing police officers in civil liability cases. I became interested in this issue when I was a police officer in Hartford. One of my positions, I was on patrol most of the time, the only time I was brought inside, was to be what is called the civil litigation officer. And that's the officer who coordinates with the attorneys who are representing police officers who are being sued. You help them with their interrogatories, depositions, you do the investigations of these civil liability claims. And I noticed that police officers were getting sued for the same thing over and over again. So I went to Chief Massini. I said, Chief, cops don't even know they can get sued, because they don't get sued that often there, but they get sued enough. But still, we have no training on it. Why don't we have training to teach police officers how to avoid getting sued? He said, good idea, go ahead and do it. So I did it, started to teach it in service with Judge Fishman, then Post asked us to provide it to the recruits, and it became required training in Connecticut. And it has been required training ever since. So, my representation of police officers and municipalities has focused almost exclusively on misconduct type cases, mostly civil liability cases, once in a while, unfortunately, criminal type cases and sometimes disciplinary cases. So that's essentially all I've done for my professional life. And I think we've done a pretty good job reducing police misconduct. One of the problems that we have here in Connecticut is the officers are so well trained that we don't have a lot of serious misconduct, cases. And so, the legislature is looking outside of what happens in Connecticut to determine that there should be reforms here in Connecticut. When if they were realistic about it, what they would do is they would take each one of these reforms and see whether there's a need for it in Connecticut. And in reality, I know from my experience that they will find that we don't have any major problems here. And we don't need these reforms. The problem with demanding these reforms is you are painting with a broad brush all police officers around the country, and here in Connecticut especially, officers that aren't involved in serious acts of misconduct. I mean, we have a committee to prohibit racial profiling in Connecticut, but we've never had a successful racial profiling case in the state of Connecticut. And there's a lot of fiction around what's going on now. I don't mean to be too long-winded because I know you have questions, but historically, this is my view of why we have the present level of attack that we have in our country. When we go back to after President Obama was elected as President of the United States, he had Eric Holder as his Attorney General. And Eric Holder is someone that's undisputedly has a bias against police officers. He had a written and spoken agenda that more police officers should be prosecuted for civil rights violations. His mentor here in Connecticut, and it differed widely across the country, but the one in Connecticut, who was actually a good friend and was appointed by him, he took it seriously. And so the 3 years that this individual was in office, he went along with the agenda and he prosecuted for excessive use of force 10 Connecticut police officers. And these weren't serious use of force cases. These weren't serious shooting cases or serious injury cases. They weren't cases with serious racial overtones or anything. They were, just push and shove, unreasonable cases, admittedly, but not ones that officers previously had been prosecuted for. In fact, the prosecutions are under the Civil Rights Act of 1871. And in the approximate 150 years going into this year, there were no police officers in Connecticut prosecuted under the Civil Rights Act for excessive force before or after his 3-year term, but 10 during his 3 years, which demonstrates just how political the attack is on people that have bias against police officers. But what happens is when you have people at high levels of government in Washington, D.C., they're sending a message to everybody in the country. They've got a real problem here. We got bad police officers. We should prosecute more police officers. It sets the tone. And it, enables others who dislike police officers to go after police officers. And then, of course, the Trayvon Martin case came around and, people still today are saying that that's a police killing case. Earlier this week, ABC announced they're going to have a program. We're going to have 7 mothers of people who have been killed by police brutality. And one of them is Trayvon Martin's mother. And everybody knows with a rational mind that it had nothing to do with law enforcement. And then we had the Michael Brown case, and that really fueled the fire of the Black Lives Matter movement that started after Trayvon Martin. And Eric Holder's Department of Justice investigated that case. I am sure he personally reviewed that case. The district attorney reviewed the case, sent it to a grand jury. There was no prosecution. This was found to be a case of self-defense. And yet it's used to show that police officers are murderers and that they kill people unjustifiably and they kill people because of their race, when there was no issue with regard to race in that particular case outside of the fact that the officer happened to be white and the young man happened to be a Black individual. And we had Freddie Gray that followed up on that, and all of the riots that were similar to the ones that happened in Ferguson, Missouri. And in the Freddie Gray case, all of the allegations, as everybody seems to know at the end, were found to be unfounded. The police officers in that case were chasing a recidivist drug dealer, Freddie Gray. And he fell down and they brought him back and they put him in the van and he died. He had a prior back injury because of an accident. But police officers were accused of killing Freddie Gray. His mother will be one of the people on this program. And this is ABC. This is a allegedly reputable institution. But they're painting this false picture of police officers. And of course, now we have the George Floyd incident, which has brought everything really to the forefront. And it's because of George Floyd incident and that occurred that we have this present legislation. And so that's how we got here today. Now, not to defend what the officer did, because I'll tell you, I had a training class on use of force the day that incident came out in the media. And we talked about what officers should do when they bring someone to the ground and whether they can kneel on someone. And of course, the law in the Second Circuit is you can kneel on someone for the purposes of applying handcuffs. That's per se reasonable. But you can't jump on their back. And after you handcuff them, you turn them over. And that's the law. And every police officer understands that, just about every police officer, except for the officer in the George Floyd incident. So in the morning session, we talked about a lot of use of force issues, including ones relevant to that case. And then someone said, did you hear what just happened on the news? And it was the George Floyd case. And all of the officers in the class, over 40 officers in the class, they were all upset and outraged about what happened, because what this particular police officer did was wrong. And what this particular police officer did is not representative of other officers on his shift, let alone in Minneapolis, let alone in the country, and certainly not Connecticut. But it is being used against officers all around the country to paint the picture that this is what cops do. This is what cops are like. And so we need in this special session of the legislature to do something immediately. And the reality is, it's a false narrative. Nothing like this has ever occurred in our state, or most other states probably.
I have to agree. When that all happened, I belong to several online groups that are law enforcement only and involving with the training of police officers with use of force and everything. And there are thousands of officers on these forums. And sometimes their debates can get quite heated when a case comes out. They were unified across the board. Not one person, I still to this day, I have not met one officer that said, no, he was right. Not one person. Every single person has agreed that was an excessive use of force for the longevity of time that it was held, for the position for which it was held in. There's a whole slew of examples there, but I would have to agree with you 100%. Now, as far as this Connecticut bill is concerned, there is some good parts to it. It's not all bad, at least from Tom and I's perspective. We looked at it, extensively, read it. I've read it multiple times now. I'm all for the body cameras and the dash cameras and random drug testing and mental health, awareness for police officers with the things they see, depending on what they're looking for and how they're going to use it. There are things about this that I like, but one thing that everybody across the board in law enforcement is very upset about, and a lot of the public does not understand, is qualified immunity. I know cops that don't understand qualified immunity. Could you explain what qualified immunity is? Are we the only ones that have it? Are there other public officials that possess something similar to this? And what's your opinion on the whole qualified immunity standard?
Qualified immunity was established in Harlow versus Fitzgerald, and it's a doctrine that protects all government employees. So the people in the legislature are protected by qualified immunity. People passing this bill, the mayors, people that work in town hall in some way. I mean, all government employees are really protected by this. And the reason the U.S. Supreme Court created this doctrine of qualified immunity is because they want to encourage public employees to do their job without the fear of warrantless litigation and personal liability. And I think every taxpayer wants the people working for them to be out there doing their job, not being afraid to make a mistake, and suffering personal liability, because you're not going to have people working in government if they're going to be held personally liable. The second part of it is to protect public employees from the burdens of litigation. So that means that we as taxpayers, we don't want our government employees sitting in depositions, preparing interrogatories, meeting with their attorneys, sitting in court trying cases that are essentially warrantless cases that don't have any merit. When you're looking at a qualified immunity case, in order to survive qualified immunity for the plaintiff's part, it's really not that difficult. It's a two-part test, and either one can be first or second, but years ago when it was created, it had to be in order. Now it doesn't. But the first test is whether or not the person committed a constitutional violation. In the George Floyd case, that was excessive force. That's a constitutional violation. So the officer will be held liable for that. But if there is no constitutional violation, well, this case doesn't have any merit. Why should it be litigated? Why should we spend time and burden, trying this case in court? Let's get rid of it. That's kind of like a screening process. If it is unconstitutional, and that means only that you have some issue of fact, something that someone could hang their hat on and say, could a reasonable jury find liability? Could they find that there was some constitutional violation? Not that it really was necessarily, but could it be found by some issue of fact, which is not very difficult to prove. Usually use of force cases, okay, when the officer's done something wrong, they don't pass that first test. Let's go to the second one now. The second test is, even though a jury might find a constitutional violation, was the law clearly established at the time that that use of force was unconstitutional? Now, I know that both of you are former West Hartford officers, and last year there was a Second Circuit Court of Appeals case, the Machete case out of West Hartford, where West Hartford officers went to the School of the Deaf, and there was this 14-year-old kid, I think he was 14, maybe 12, whatever, but he had thrown a chair and a stick at a teacher, and they found him outside in some rubble. I guess they're doing construction there, and he had a rock in his hand, and the police officers arrived and told him to drop the rock, and the teacher was standing in front of him, signing him, telling him to drop the rock. If you don't drop the rock, they give a warning, you're going to be tasered. And he didn't drop it, so he was tased. Now, in that particular case, that was not an unreasonable use of force. The officer was found to be entitled to qualified immunity because this young man posed a risk of harm to the teacher, had an opportunity to submit and didn't do it, and therefore using this intermediate use of force was not unreasonable. More recently, and I'm doing this so you see the equivalency, in the Truberg case, which is a case that was decided last month, a few weeks ago, by the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, this man is resisting police officers. There are various types of use of force, but let's go to the taser use of force, which was the only one questioned as being unreasonable. There was a lieutenant there, and the lieutenant tasered this guy while he was still resisting. Seconds later, he tased him a second time. The jury believed that the first tasing was reasonable, but the second tasing was unreasonable. If somebody is no longer resisting, which is the clearly established law, then it's unreasonable to use an intermediate use of force, and therefore he was held liable. How bad was this case? How high were the damages in the case? How much injury did he suffer? Well, when the jury came back with compensatory damages of 0. The judge sent him back and said, no, you got to at least find nominal damages for an excessive force case for constitutional violation. The jury came back with an award of compensatory damages to compensate this guy for his harm of 25 cents. They did find him liable for $30,000 in punitive damages, which have to be paid out of his own pocket. So if you understand the law that I just gave you, the tests and the application in those two cases, you see it's only the cases that really don't merit trial, that don't have much substance to them, where we get rid of qualified immunity. It's not the serious injury cases. It's not the serious constitutional violations. And it's in everybody's interest, and it's all in taxpayers' interest. Now, if you don't have qualified immunity, then we're not screening out these weak cases. And who gets hit? The taxpayers get hit because they have to pay for the litigation. Let's say a jury comes back on a weak case and they happen to find, but they don't, against the police, but they do not find punitive damages. Who pays for that? The taxpayers pay for that. And so they lose, the taxpayers. Who are the winners of these cases? Well, when we're talking about use of force cases have a typical profile. That is, the police officer must respond and deal with the individual because they're doing some violation of the law. They don't submit, they resist, they run away, they attack the police officer. There's some reason for the police officer to use force, and the force he used is claimed to be unreasonable. And who are those people? Violators of the law. And they might be minor violations, they might be more serious criminals. They will benefit from getting rid of qualified immunity. But probably the greatest beneficiaries are the plaintiff's bar, the people that like to sue police officers. So if you want to vote for or against qualified immunity, if you're a taxpayer, you'll say we want to keep qualified immunity. If you're a criminal or someone who likes to sue police, you'll be on the other side. I think that's it in a nutshell. I'm sorry, I'm giving you probably being too winded, but I wanted to give you the story.
That's perfectly fine. Tom, go ahead. You had something?
Elliot, in speaking to a lot of the officers in my department, you're correct. A lot of officers don't entirely understand the concept. And as far as the general public, I think it's, for in the most part, they entirely don't understand it. So I kind of have a three-part question, but it kind of encases some of the most common questions that people have been asking me about the whole qualified immunity issue. One of them is qualified immunity something that exists in the state, or is it just a federal issue? And is it something that is only used in excessive force cases or in any other types of civil rights violations or constitutional violations? And the last one is, why is it that people think this is an end-all, be-all scream to any kind of accountability on the police officer's part? Why is this suddenly this word that's been dragged out as if we cloak ourselves with this and are immune to any accountability for our wrongdoings?
Okay. The qualified immunity that I just explained is the federal qualified immunity. But there is a qualified immunity, it's called governmental immunity in the state courts. And this is called discretionary immunity. So if an officer uses discretion as to whether to stop someone, whether to arrest someone, whether to use force against someone, the most significant case coming out recently a few weeks ago from the Connecticut Supreme Court is the Borelli case. It applied in a pursuit case. When an officer makes discretionary decisions, as well as all government employees on the state level, they have the similar type of immunity as in the federal qualified immunity. And the purposes are exactly the same. So I don't have to repeat that. So yes, we do have it in the state, and federally, I happen to use as an example use of force cases, but it applies in any type of a civil rights violation for any type of an employee beyond police officer. So it is extremely broad in its protection against warrantless lawsuits. And the last part of your question was, why do they believe that this is the end all and be all? It's because they don't know, because they're ignorant as to what qualified immunity is. They think that police officers are escaping accountability because they're protected by qualified immunity, which is obviously not the case. In fact, more often than not, when officers are sued, there aren't punitive damages. And as I say, the taxpayers will be ones to pick up the bill. It's only when officers are held liable for punitive damages, which is relatively rare, that it would have any effect on those individual officers. So it's not going to change, that particular issue is not going to change the way police officers act.
Excellent. Now, if for some reason qualified immunity is limited or taken away, there's talk of police officers having to supply liability insurance when they go to work. This brings up a whole lot of questions, like who pays for that? Does the officer pay? Does the union pay? Does the agency pay? You know, how will they determine how much these policies cost? If you're working days in Simsbury and then different officers working, you know, second shift narcotics in Hartford, I'm assuming their policies are going to be way different in price. You know, like how will that work? Is there what will officers be able to do to protect themselves for all these lawsuits that might come their way?
Yeah, there are several insurance companies out there. I will not name them because I'm not marketing for them, but they do provide coverage for police officers. You know, one just does criminal, one does disciplinary and criminal, one does a lot more common things, including liability insurance. And I don't know how they set their rates. Some of them sell insurance individually to police officers. And there are a number of unions in Connecticut and all around the country, because one of them is an insurance company that started out in California for California police officers, but a lot of Connecticut officers have it. You know, the unions pay for it. And the insurance isn't a lot of money. My greater concern is, and you know, strangely enough, just this morning I received a call from a police officer because of this qualified immunity. wanting to know what he should do with his assets, whether he should set up a private corporation. And you're right, there is a concern out there. I'm concerned more about the good people leaving law enforcement. I'm concerned about the lack of quality people entering law enforcement. These people, although ill-informed, that are trying to push for this legislation, they think they're well-intentioned and they're doing some good. But the reality of the situation is, ironically, they're going to harm citizens. They're going to make things worse in law enforcement. If we don't have quality people working in law enforcement, what are you going to have? Poorer services, more misconduct, more harm, more liability. If you don't have police officers that are confident in going out and doing their jobs, and we have depolicing, what are you going to have? You're going to have more crime. And that's what we're going to have. So these people really think, well, we're just doing something that is going to make law enforcement better, when the reality is most of the pieces of legislation, outside of the ones that you mentioned earlier, are going to actually make things a lot worse and a lot worse for their constituents. I got a mailing yesterday from a state senator, and in one of his first initiatives is this police accountability. So I shot him an email and we had an exchange last night, because I am essentially saying that he is acquiescing in going along with this program, and therefore he's part of the attack on police. And he says, no, I'm not attacking police. I just want to make things better. And it's because they're not ignorant people. It's just that they don't know what they're doing. They don't know the need for the particular reforms. They haven't investigated it, and that's what I urged them to do. Before you pass any of these reforms, where is the need and what is going to be the result of this particular reform? I mean, one of the reforms, and I'm sorry to babble on about this, but one of the reforms is preventing officers from using evidence that they secure during consent searches. Well, that essentially eliminates consent searches. And, one of the best tools that police officers have are consensual searches. And if somebody is, going out and asking for consent, they can't use coercion. They can't threaten someone. It's got to be willing and voluntary. Can I search your car? Yeah, go ahead and search my car. It's something like that. But police officers won't be able to do that anymore. And so what'll that mean? That means there'll be less effective law enforcement. And we all know that there have been very, very serious criminals that have been caught on mere motor vehicle stops. I use as an example Tim McVeigh, the Oklahoma bomber, motor vehicle stop.
Ted Bundy,
the guy that stopped, the guy that shot Brian Aselton in East Hartford, a police officer, for those
Alex Sosberg.
Outside of your will. I mean, it was just a regular motor vehicle stop. And moreover, how many times do we have officers that stop vehicles and ask for searches and find drugs? I cite one recent case from the Second Circuit Court of Appeals about an East Hartford officer who, it happened in East Hartford, it was a Hartford officer, and he found like 13,000 packets of heroin with a consent search and took these drugs off the street. And then yesterday we hear the announcement about the increased number of people that are dying because of drug overdoses. So these people pass this legislation, don't they care about the people dying because they're taking drugs, too many drugs? And they take guns off the street. And, everybody's concerned about, the dangers in our society because people have guns. And one of the things that I mentioned or think about sometimes in the presidential debates, when Mayor Bloomberg was being chastised for stop and frisk. And he sheepishly said, we were wrong, we shouldn't have done it. There's disproportionate minority people that were stopped and frisked. But according to the ACLU, which is not a very favorable police organization, not a pro-police organization, during the period they did stop and frisk, New York City police officers took approximately 66,000 illegal guns off the street. And my question is, how about the fathers and mothers and innocent children who may have been killed by one of these guns? Don't we care about that? When I talk to these legislators, one of the things that I say to them, I say, listen, police officers, get drugs off the street. They get guns off the street. Police officers get dangerous criminals off the street during consensual searches and even consensual encounters on the street, even before the search. Don't you want that? And look, think of this for a minute. Pretend that someone you love has been killed by someone using an illegal gun, an overdose on drugs, by a dangerous criminal. And you find out after your loved one is dead and searching that terrible hole in your heart and in your soul, that some police officer saw this individual, had reasonable suspicion to stop him, but said, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to ask for a consent search because I'm going to be attacked. I'm going to be called a racist if it happens to be a minority. I might get into an altercation, then use excessive force, and that's the end of my career. Hell, I might end up in jail. Why should I get involved in this thing? But if the police officer had acted as they're supposed to as a police officer, your loved one would be alive today. That's what people really have to think about.
That's so true. I mean, I know Tom will probably agree. I mean, between the two of us in our careers, we were very proactive. We made hundreds, if not really thousands of arrests, I would say. And thousands. And when we add up all the, wanted people, fugitives from justice, narcotics, guns that we've taken off the street, 99% of our work would be eliminated if we went back in time and had to operate under the rules they want to present. It would never would have happened.
Yeah, I don't understand why there's an attack on proactivity in the police field, unless it is that we don't want to find and prevent any more crime. I said, as Rob said, I've been proactive my entire career, even at 30 years. When I'm still on the street, I'm still very proactive. Yeah, we found lots of guns. We found lots of drugs. We found lots of wanted people. But, more mundane things. We found lots of intoxicated drivers. We found a lot of people who were involved in fraudulent activities, criminal impersonation. We found, they said, fugitives. Some, maybe not me in particular, but some of the people I work with found children that were being human trafficked, kidnap victims. All things that I would think the public wants more of and doesn't want on the streets. And in talking to the officers in my department this morning, quite a few of them said that proactivity is done for a lot of the reasons you just mentioned. Are they going to ask those couple questions? The way the law is written is they don't want you asking questions other than your license, reg, and insurance card. And the way it's written, even if the guy handed you a valid license, it said, I believe in the statute, all it says is a valid license. That's the end of the questioning. What if he gave you a license that isn't his, but it's valid? It's not that, people don't lie to the police, about their identity. It just curtails any kind of proactive police work that you not only want, you want to encourage. That's why I became a police officer. I didn't become a police officer to sit in the back of a parking lot reading a fishing magazine. I wanted to go out and make a difference. I wanted to get bad guys in jail. I wanted to make my community better. I wanted to do things that were going to make the public happy with what we were doing, make them safe. None of that is going to happen now. And I don't think that's being overly negative. I think people are being cautious. They're saying, is it worth it to me? Is it worth it to my family or my future to get all these frivolous lawsuits and be arrested or sued or whatever? And the answer is going to be no. Why would you?
Yeah, that's a great point, Tom. And the thing to add to that, Tom, is all those other things we've already talked about, they also are going after, obviously, in a big way, use of force. And they want to restrict that use of force beyond the federal standard of Graham versus Connor, Tennessee versus Garner. They make it even more restrictive. So when you turn over enough rocks, if you're a proactive police officer, if you're out there every day looking for things, you're eventually going to find the snake. You're going to find the one that is going to resist, that is going to flee, that is going to run, that is going to assault you. And now you're placed in a position where you have to use tactics or suggested techniques that aren't going to work, and they've taken away things from you that you're afraid now to use. It's going to be more dangerous for you and for obviously the public. So all the way around, it feels like the job is dying, and it's dying at the hands of an untrue statements being said about our profession. I don't even know how else to explain it other than that. But
I don't know why a group like Yeah, I don't know why a group like MAD isn't more vocal about this, because one of the things that we discussed today was just run-of-the-mill DUI. If you see someone driving recklessly, and you pull them over, and lots of times with DUI investigations, intoxicated driver investigations, there's some questioning, there's some back and forth, there's some building of your probable cause, you're observing things. And sometimes that last piece is what may be under the seat. Maybe it's the bottle they threw under the seat, or maybe the drug paraphernalia or whatever. The thing that maybe gets you over the top to get them out of the car to do the field sobriety test, whatever. I'm hearing seasoned quality officers saying, screw it. I'll just let him go. Let him go. Well, why am I going to take him out of the car if he says he's not drunk and fight him on the side of the road and lose my job? Screw it. I just won't bother. And these are guys that it shocked me to hear, but honestly, after 30 years, maybe I'm heading that way too. That why would you bother if apparently society doesn't care? Why should you? I know that's wrong, and I'm not advocating for it, but there's a lot of that sentiment going around.
Well, for you guys who are a lot closer to law enforcement than I am in years, so we have a police officer and he sees a minority person committing a motor vehicle violation, and maybe it's unsafe driving, because almost all motor vehicle violations are aimed at making our roads safer, so it's got to be. But I don't think I'm going to stop that guy. Or maybe you're having an encounter with somebody maybe you got to arrest him because he's got a warrant for you. But as Rob mentioned, he starts running away. Well, why run after him? Because if you run after him, you're probably going to have to tackle him, use force against him. Why get involved in an altercation and hurt yourself? And someone claims you use excessive force and you might get sued and you may not be indemnified. I mean, why bother that? So maybe you should walk up to people that, are warranted and say, I got a warrant for you. Would you come to the police department with me? And if they say no, they say, okay, well, if you feel like you want to turn yourself in later on, why don't you do that? I mean, I know that's absurd to say those things, but we're not far away from that.
No, we're not.
From what I'm hearing from you two.
No, absolutely not.
Go ahead, Tom.
No, I'm just agreeing. Absolutely not. And these are all things this morning at the front desk. We went back and forth with various scenarios with car stops, and not made up examples, all examples that we've had. And, listen, we found people with warrants for murder. These are people who may murder us, trying to take them into custody. So why would I want to find them? Because one, it seems to be they're more interested in, I say society or the legislature, is coming after us for using force rather than looking at why we're using force in the first place, like trying to take a dangerous felon into custody who may have taken somebody's life. To hear cops, like example after example, it got a little heated, got a little crazy. But people are saying, well, what about this? Well, I wouldn't do that. Well, what about this? You'd be an idiot to do that. What about this? Well, don't look, don't bother. So people were saying, for the serious stuff, we'll do a warrant and we'll worry about somebody else serving it. I mean, these are good cops. These are the kind of people who take care of their own business. But now they're saying, well, we'll submit a warrant to the court, and if it gets signed, it gets signed. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And, someone else will find them and worry about it, not me.
Yeah. So the solution to our complaining about this, which are very legitimate complaints, are to get the public to be more vocal, the public that wants to support police officers, the public that wants to be protected, and more importantly, the government leaders, because the government leaders are afraid to buck the protests in the media. And the media is truly being misled, and they're actually leading falsely too. And the tide has to be turned, but the only way it can be turned is to get the public to stand up and do something about it. And so every police officer that's out there has to have the conversation that we're having right now, not amongst ourselves, but with everybody out there in the public. Every time you have your family dinner and you're talking to your family members, or in a coffee shop because you don't go to bars anymore. No matter where you encounter people, to be taking the opportunity to try to turn these people around so that the voice of the public stands up, because what is going to happen is what's happening in New York now, where they had one of the safest cities, big cities in the country. It's going to be one of the more dangerous cities in the country. And eventually the people in New York are going to stand up, and we're tired of our fellow citizens being shot and killed and the criminals taking control. I don't want to wait till that for that. So we have to stand up and speak about these issues. And I hope that's happening today at the legislature, because they're having the public hearings on this bill today. And I hope the voice gets out there to turn this thing around. One of the things, I think it was Tom that asked why is this happening, and why are these people that are supposed to be intelligent, thoughtful people, why are they, proposing these reforms and part and parcel of this attack on police officers? I think the reality of the situation is they're too focused on the problems that are being raised by the mob. Racism, racist police officers. You hear it all the time. If you're a black man, you're twice as likely to be shot and killed by a police officer than if you were white. And that's true, statistically. I mean, if 12.2 or so % of our population is black, and the amount of police shooting deaths, according to the Washington Post, is, between 24 and 25% each year, well, 12.2 or 12.5 into 24, 25, that's twice as likely. What they don't seem to realize is that police officers are having confrontations with people who are very often felons. They're being violent. They are armed. And that's when police officers shoot these individuals. And if you look at the FBI crime statistics, to say a very politically incorrect thing, and I have the exact stats on it, which I can provide to you, but the reality is of murders, it's more than four times likely to be killed by a black man, almost 5 times as likely to be robbed by a black man. And it's even worse when we get to the statistics of people that commit crimes under the age of 18. It's even higher. It's over 5 times as likely to be robbed or killed by a young black man under 18 years of age. And police officers are the ones that go out there and enforce these laws and confront these violent, dangerous people. And of course the stats are going to be skewed. I don't know why it's not higher than twice as much. But people don't want to say it. They're afraid to say it, because if they say it, they are a racist. But if we look at the reality of what's going on here, the best long-term solution is to help these young minority kids not enter a life of crime. That's the most important thing we can do, to bring our police officers into the school so they get to know these kids in kindergarten, so they can teach these kids proper life lessons, make proper decisions in their lives, not enter lives of crime. That's the very best thing that we can do. I have these cases every single year. I presently have 3 cases where young men have died or seriously injured other people because they've decided to enter in a young age a life of crime. And these are tragedies. And I'm going to give you just one example of something that hit me. There's a major municipality, stolen car. This young kid steals a car, drives through a red light at 80 miles an hour and kills 2 innocent people. So I deposed this kid in prison. And he says, "Mr. Spector, would you do me a favor?" I said, "What's that?" "Would you tell the family how badly I feel about what happened? I just had to get away from the police officers. And these 2 upstanding citizens are dead. And their families will not have these wonderful people in their lives anymore, because this kid made a stupid decision to steal a car and drive through a red light." But when he said to me, "Would you please apologize?" I saw a kid with a conscience. And I thought to myself, I wonder if it's possible, if he had some responsible adult in his life early on in age, if he would have learned, you respect people, you respect property, you don't commit crimes, you respect the police, you comply with their authority, if he might have stayed in school, got a job, and raised a respectable family. We have to start with these kids when they're very, very young. And I don't think there's anything wrong with teaching them a sense of responsibility at an early age. And I think the best people to do that are police officers, to get into schools and do that. That's the only way we're going to turn it around. So when I talk about the FBI UCR statistics, hey, I don't create those statistics, okay? I'm just reporting the grossly disproportionate number of minority crimes that we have. And you know, some people might say, well, you know, that's because police officers are more prone to arrest people because they happen to be black, young black men, than men of other races or ethnicities. Well, I'm talking about serious violent crimes. I'm talking about murder and robbery, aggravated assault, violent crimes. And so, I mean, if anybody ever presented that, I would have to say to them, so you're telling me there's an Asian man, there's an Indian or Pakistani man who commits a murder or a robbery or an aggravated assault, and the police officer saying to those people, well, you know, we're not going to arrest you. That's not true. Police officers arrest people whenever they have probable cause of a serious crime in any one of those situations. And the statistics are the statistics. They're not opinions. They are what they are. And until we take our heads out of the sand and recognize that we got a problem with the disproportionate number of violent crimes being committed by minorities, then we're always going to have a disproportionate number of people stopped, frisked, searched, and killed by police officers.
I had another question for you in regards to the whole use of force thing. Can they, a lot of cops are asking, how can they limit what we do use of force wise at the state level when there's already documented Supreme Court case law on use of force? And how can they do that?
Well, they can do that because our state laws can be more restrictive, and our department policies can even be more restrictive. They cannot, you know, say something that would be a violation of the federal law, and our policies can't say something that's a violation of state law, but we can be as restrictive if we want to. And even though the law allows a police officer to do it, let's say your police department says that you can no longer handcuff people you arrest. They can do that, right? I mean, federal law allows you to do it, state law allows you to do it, but if they want to be more restrictive and say you can't do it, they can do that. Can you be held liable under federal law, under state law if you do it? Of course not. Is it a violation of policy? Yep. We'll give you 2 days. Okay, that can happen. Now, one of the dangers of what's happening is they want to create a separate civil rights action under Connecticut's Constitution. And that'll greatly increase liability, especially if they take away some protections. It means most of the cases that are now being tried in federal court, they'll be brought in state court by plaintiff's attorneys. And hopefully that won't get through. But that's how it can happen. Yeah, I mean, you know, what the federal law says is this is what's permissible under the Constitution, but it's not like a police officer has a right to use that force.
That's interesting. Now,
I've been interested in your opinions on the chokehold thing.
Yeah, no, well, it's funny because the chokehold, technically, it's not a choke. If you're doing it correctly, it's a carotid restraint. It's shutting off the blood flow on each side of the brain, on each side of the neck to put the person unconscious temporarily. It's not, they're still breathing, okay? If you misapply the hold and come across the throat, it becomes an air choke, okay? The problem that I've seen in law enforcement, first of all, it's always been listed as deadly force in Connecticut in my career. So I think it was changed back in the 80s. You may know that better than me. But ever since I started working in the late 90s, any kind of what they refer to as chokehold, carotid restraint, has always been listed as deadly force, as far as I know. And when we ever teach these things to police officers, we teach that under the umbrella of this is deadly force. And we really teach them because they've become quite popular holds with the advent of mixed martial arts and UFC. And there's all kinds of people doing these things. You saw a New York City cop a couple days ago caught in a front guillotine choke. And you need to know how they work and how they operate to know what kind of danger you're in and to understand how to escape these holds should they ever be applied to you. So that's one of the first reasons I would teach a police officer. And secondly, I think, honestly, it's the most humane way to stop someone that is totally out of control, trying to hurt themselves or someone else. And if you have the ability, if Tom can keep the person somewhat occupied and try to talk them down while another person comes up behind that's trained in this technique and can subdue them from behind, temporarily incapacitate them until the handcuffs get on and get them the help they need, I would much rather have that happen to a family member of mine versus getting hit with a baton 15 times or struck with hands and fists or potentially shot with a firearm. Why they take it away is because they don't understand the hold. There's thousands of martial artists around the world every single day, as young as 3 and 4 or 5 years old, practicing the grappling arts, judo, jiu-jitsu, sambo, applying these holds in training and competition, and no one ever gets hurt. Almost zero. I don't even think there has been a death, because they're applying it correctly. A police officer learns it 1 time or 2 times in the academy. They don't maintain training it after the fact. Years go by, they go to apply the technique, and they end up not doing it correctly, and they come across the throat, and they squeeze too hard, too long in an area that they shouldn't be. And that's how they end up causing injury. And a lot of other times, we're also going against people in the street that may have narcotics in their system or may have medical conditions that we are unaware of that in that moment. That, you know, now when they're all amped up and they're fighting with you and this hold is being applied to them, it's just an added thing they have to contest with. And what's one of the very first things someone will complain of that's having a heart attack? They'll say, I'm having difficulty breathing. I can't breathe, okay? So quite often, I think that it really comes down to training. If police officers could receive consistent training over a period of time, the result would be they would be much more formidable to utilize these techniques. Without that formal and consistent training with qualified individuals teaching them how to do it, it is a liability.
Okay, we were trained on how to do chokeholds back in the 70s, all right? And I used it almost in every fight that I was in, and we got into a few fights in Hartford, okay? Because it was very effective. And you're right, I didn't want to hit anybody with my nightstick or my blackjack. And as far as I know, in Connecticut, that was a time where we're using it for any type of use of force situation, and almost every type of use of force situation when you're struggling, at least for me. No one was ever injured. So that's, you know, that's my own personal practical experience. So present policy is only in deadly use of force. Rob, it sounds like you would like to see something beyond that it's not just a deadly use of force.
I think it would be less lethal, because by the very design of the way, you know, for lateral vascular neck restraint is designed to be used, it is designed not to kill. It is designed to put the person unconscious so that you can subdue them. Now, again, like I said, if I change the position of my hand and bring my forearm across the throat and crush the windpipe, that is a whole together different technique, okay? So I look at it as if we could consistently train officers to utilize positional control, how to control a human body, how to control their skeleton without the use of strikes, it's actually way safer for both sides. And you can consistently apply, I mean, in my academy, I'm sitting in one of my academies right now, hundreds of these techniques are applied on a weekly basis to all of my students. And I've been training since I was a kid, and I'm almost 48 years old. And I've yet, knock on wood, to sustain an injury. And this is under live, you know, training. We are resisting each other. We are trying to stop the other person. And I can't think of an injury we've had, knock on wood, I said, where this has been applied correctly and failed to do what it's supposed to do. If you made it so that it was less lethal force, maybe even like in the same category as a taser, I think you could significantly reduce deadly force from having to be used. In some situations where most police shootings are what, 0 to 6 feet? They're pretty close in contact distance. And if you have another officer there and somebody trained and one person can keep the person attention while the other one comes up from behind, applies the restraint, I think you could actually limit deadly force from being utilized.
I'd like to know about one other thing that you mentioned, that is, if they can speak, they can breathe. That's something that I've commonly heard from police officers. And I think that in my mind, please, and I want you to correct me, if they're saying they can't breathe, it's not that they really can't breathe, it's they're having trouble breathing. So do anything to try to allow them to breathe better, changing your position and their position. And
so in my experience, and I'm a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt for many years now, I've had chokes applied to me thousands of times. I've been put to sleep unconscious on many times where I failed to tap. If someone applies the carotid restraint correctly with proper technique and it's on, you cannot talk. You may hear a gurgle or two, but you cannot speak. You physically cannot speak. Now, if it's the same position but a looser hold, now they can talk, but to the untrained public, the position may look the same. So I could have a correct restraint on, and a different person could have the exact same hold on, but not with the same pressure. And one person could be saying, I can't breathe, and mine is not going to be able to speak at all because they're not going to be able to talk. Now, it could be because if they're saying they can't breathe, it could be because they're panicking. They're normally not been in this, confined space type of hold where they feel like they can't escape and they start to panic. That claustrophobic effect can set in. It could be like I said, medical conditions kicking in where they're starting to have a heart attack over the situation and now they can't breathe. I absolutely believe that's the cause of it.
Okay. And obviously my question pertains to situations well outside of chokeholds, other types of positions that officers may have someone in or they may be in.
Like positional control, you mean?
Yeah, I think we have to get away from telling police officers, don't worry about their breathing. If they can talk, they can breathe. That's not a problem. I think we have to get away from that attitude. If they're saying they can't breathe, do something so that they can breathe better.
Correct. I use the George Floyd example. If that was, I would like to think that if that was me and I had him on the ground to the point where he started to say those things, I would be sitting him up. I'd be asking him,
Exactly.
I'd be getting oxygen. I'd be, hey, step up the ambulance on the radio. I'd be looking to help him the best I can because, yeah, do people sometimes fake that they're medically having a medical condition so that they can try to escape? Yeah, sometimes they do. But sometimes they're probably telling you the truth and you can't ignore that. You have to ask, once you have them under control, and he was clearly under control, and he's starting to say that he can't breathe, it's our duty, no matter what they've done, to try to assist them and help them the best we can.
Good.
Tom, you have anything else?
Well, in talking about that, it's not just the chokehold thing, it's all the stuff they're attaching to it. And the media, if you haven't noticed, I certainly have in the last couple of weeks, is certainly, again, weaponizing it. Is now it's a knee on the back. He touched his neck. He did this. Like one of the things our legislature quickly came out with that order was the armbar takedown. It has nothing to do with the neck. Most of I'm a taller person, so most of the people I encounter, I'm going to be taller than. In a physical encounter, when I'm reaching out to grab someone, I'm usually grabbing around the shoulders, the head, the neck, or whatever, especially like a foot chase, because I'm a foot taller than most of them. But now they said you can't even do an arm bar, which is, people call it different things in different disciplines, but, turning the wrist, locking the elbow, taking him to the ground, affecting your handcuff position, handcuffing them, does really nothing more than, one, get them under control. It maybe embarrasses them a little bit, but it doesn't do any lasting harm, doesn't affect their breathing, doesn't affect their circulation. And it's effective. It's one of the most basic moves you're taught, is take them off their feet, take them to the ground, hold an arm, get control, get them handcuffed, and then get off their back. But even now that they're talking about not doing, and that's what's got a lot of officers scared. And so they're like, well, can I touch him here? Can I touch him there? When you're fighting for your life or trying to control a suspect, you shouldn't be worried about, can I touch him here? Can I touch him there? Am I going to get in trouble? That's not what you should be thinking about. You should be thinking about gaining control of your suspect. Not, oh, I'm going to get sued. Oh, the person's taking a cell phone video of me. I touched his head. Uh-oh, very bad. I touched his neck. The guy's accusing me on a cell phone video of touching his neck. These are not things cops should be worried about. They should be worried about taking the guy to the ground, gaining control, cuffing him, and doing what they have to do, and not getting themselves or anybody else harmed, including the suspect.
And when you take away those things, the positional body control, being able to hold someone and pin someone while you get their hands behind your back, those officers now are forced to fill that void with something else. So now instead of being able to control them with my knee on their back or on their chest to hold them down until I get the cuffs on temporarily, now what am I going to do? Am I going to have to taser them more? Am I going to hit them with my baton, punch them? It opens up a whole nother things that we shouldn't have to use that fast.
Yeah. Can I give an example here?
Yep.
Rob, I don't know if you were there years ago when we were West Hartford. There was a pursuit from Hartford that came into West Hartford, and it was a crash. And we all kind of got there at the same time. Like I said, it was right off of Kaya onto Prospect.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a very small female Hartford officer there who was just there was 3 people in the car. Everyone's, climbing out of windows. Everyone's, trying to get a hold of these people. They made a big mess there. And what was one of the most ugly things to watch is I was watching this female officer who didn't have the physical skills and the physical brute force to control the one that she grabbed, and she was hitting him repeatedly with her collapsible baton, and it looked ugly as hell. But as someone who knows what was going on, it was just plain ineffective. It was a cop who was panicking, who was just whack, 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 and it was doing nothing. Now you take away some of these positional body controls, you're going to go back to, you know, those people just flailing away with a stick, or like you said, the taser, or jumping right to something deadly force, because you know you're going to lose the fight. You know, I can't do this, I can't do that. Now, you know, we were wrestling on the ground. Now this person's on top of me. Now you have no choice. That's, you know, it's like taking the first block out of the first step. The first step you do. I mean, no one goes to work wanting to shoot somebody. If you got to take somebody into custody, I'd rather they just submit. But if they don't submit, I'd rather use as little force as possible. Would you agree that, you know, you don't go to work looking to get into a fight?
No.
But if you're going to get in the fight, I want to have all the tools in my toolbox available to me. I don't want, you know, to be limited, because it's my life. And I don't want to be worried about my livelihood. If I, you know, got to go, is it my life or my livelihood? Should I balance this right now? Or
one of my friends uses a term, ineffective force typically looks to the normal public like excessive force.
so that was that incident with that I was talking about. I mean, to anybody watching it, it was probably one of the ugliest things I ever saw. You know, she was panicked, she was overwhelmed, and she was going to lose the physical encounter until some other officers stepped in. But she just looked like a whirling McDervish with the stick, and it was doing nothing. It was doing nothing at all. You know, and I just think back, you know, if that person had any martial arts training or skill, or had a little bit more physical bulk where she could have done one of those maneuvers, kid would have been on the ground and handcuffed, you know, like the other two were. You know, but here, you know, in front of on Prospect and Kaya and everybody watching this, you know, she's holding on to him by his hood, just flailing him with her collapsible baton. It was awful looking.
I
don't know that she did him much harm either.
What's that?
I have a quick question.
I don't even know.
I'm sorry, go on.
I was just saying, and I don't know that officer did that suspect much harm. It just looked terrible.
One quick question about firearm holds. It came up yesterday in a discussion where an attorney representing a police officer was talking about one of his officers taking a woman out of a car with a firearm hold and broke her arm. And so, I mean, it seems, oh my God, he broke her arm, pulling her out of a car. So talk to me about firearm holds. Did the officer do it inappropriately? Does it sometimes just happen, given the nature of the call? Or nature of the use of force? I mean, I don't know much about firearm holds.
Yeah, and I'd be more than happy. I've done many demonstrations for police chiefs and stuff like that. I'd be more than happy to have you or anyone come down. I tried to get the Police Accountability Task Force to let me come down and demonstrate and show the differences between these things and why some are safer than others, and what the reality of using these types of things are. And have yet to hear anything back. But anytime you lock a joint, whether it's a finger, a wrist, an elbow, a shoulder, a knee, a hip, an ankle, that joint can be locked many different ways. There's all different angles of locks that can be applied, whether there's straight arm locks or more like Kimura type arm locks. There's various different ones. And when the hold is properly applied, it does have a lot of control over the individual's skeletal ability to move their skeleton. However, it is still somewhat pain compliance. What I mean by that is someone totally resists it and doesn't care about the moment, that the pain doesn't affect them. They can fight just far enough where enough force gets put on where the joint can break. And it doesn't necessarily stop the person, especially if they're under the influence, especially if they have any kind of mental illness, or they're just so focused on escaping, they may absolutely allow their arm to break in order to get away. Okay, and they won't even probably feel it in the moment. Okay, now it happens all the time in competition. Somebody will be locked and they don't want to lose, they don't want to win. They'll let the arm break, and then finally the ref will have to step in because they don't want to stop. Now, when you get to body control, actually controlling the torso, the hips, the person's body, and controlling that against the ground, that they can't really resist. They can't resist. If you know how to positionally control someone with your body, it is extremely difficult for that other person to get away from you. Think of swimming. If you could be the strongest person that you could run the mile in 4 minutes and bench press 500 pounds. If you don't understand the concept of treading water, no matter how strong and fit you are, if I throw you over your head, you're going to drown. Okay, because you're just going to drown tired. Okay, you're not going to be able to understand what it takes to get back to the surface and paddle to the side. But you can teach a child, in most cases, to successfully doggy paddle to the side of the pool and pull themselves out, because it is technique based. Okay, and the things that we try to teach officers are very much conceptual and technique based, that rely on leverage and body mechanics versus brute strength and size. And we want things that maybe don't necessarily hurt, but they control the movement of the person. Does that make sense?
Sure.
So
I still don't know what a bar arm hold is, and you don't have anybody to demonstrate it, so that's fine.
I can totally show you, but basically there's various ones. So maybe you have the elbow extended, where you're pulling back with using your body against theirs and hyperextending the elbow. A common one where someone's taking someone out of the car is what they refer to as a bar hammer lock or a chicken wing, where you come up and underneath to the shoulder and the arm is in this position behind their back. Okay. Right. You can bring them to the ground where you put in a handcuff position. So there's it'd be like asking what's the letter of the alphabet. There's 26, right?
Okay,
so
I get it.
Many arm locks. All right. Last question I have for you. I know you probably got to go. You're a very busy guy. And I just had this from a very smart guy that I know. He's asking about the whole military designed equipment. And there is this perception among people that we have, he actually said, well, why do you guys need tanks? And I challenged him. I said, show me a police department in the United States that has an actual tank, a military tank. And he couldn't find one, but he shows me a picture of like an armored vehicle, a Bearcat. And why is it that it hasn't been better explained to the public, I guess? Maybe that's our fault as police officers, why we need some of these things. I mean, I was on a tactical team for 18 years. I can tell you numerous circumstances where that armored vehicle has given the ability of officers to move in and rescue someone under gunfire, giving them the opportunity to get in and get someone out of the scene that normally they wouldn't be able to get to. You take those things away, take away our ability to have those things, we're going to be that much less versed in being able to go in and save somebody in an emergency, like a Sandy Hook or the HGI in Manchester, or any of these circumstances that have been occurring around the country. And I use the example of if your house is on fire and the fire department shows up, do you want them coming with the most state-of-the-art equipment and training and hoses and pump trucks and everything else? Or do you want them to grab your garden hose off the side of the house? I mean, what do people expect of us with just our uniform and the badge without the equipment that we utilize?
Well, because they're isolating issues, and it's just like every other issue. In this particular issue, it's the appearance. I remember back when I was a cop, they were talking about having Hartford cops wear blazers to cover their guns instead of uniforms to look too, military. And there's always been this conflict between appearance of police officers and what police officers really have to do. And you know what the answer is, and I'm sure you told your friend. You want to have it when you need it. It's not like we're driving around the street with it, but if you are in trouble, you want us to have all the equipment that we need to save your life. And that's the bottom line. And that should be the bottom line with all of this. It's talking about, the racial issues with stop and frisk. If you want your communities protected, you're going to want officers doing reasonable, lawful stops and frisks. And it goes throughout every question that they have when they're attacking police officers, on every tactic that a police officer uses or issue of law that empowers a police officer, that they focus on the one issue. Well, if you don't do stops and frisks, there's less minorities that are going to be stopped. If you take away consensual searches, then we're not going to be offending people who are going to be asked to be searched when they're really not criminals. You see how myopic it is? They're looking at that, those incidents where you're going to be offending people. Look at, the way I talk about it is this: the police officers do stop and frisk, they do searches, they do all of their investigative activities to make the world safer. And sometimes we have to suffer the consequences of inconvenience, annoyance, alarm, humiliation for the safety of us all. And I equate what police officers do at airports, okay? I mean, everybody that goes to an airport is searched. Those TSA officers are what I'm talking about. And everybody accepts that for airline safety. And the reality of the situation is there are a lot more police people that go through these searches and inconvenience, annoyance, alarm, humiliation, etc., for safety than what police officers are doing on the streets. But it's the same issue. And our public has to decide, what do we want? And that's what most of this, podcast has been about. You're going to make a choice. Safer communities or, what looks good.
100%.
Appearances.
I'll leave you with this story. You reminded me of it. I was with my family, actually not very long ago, and we were down in Disney Springs, the downtown Disney area in Disney World, and we're walking around the shop areas there, and I had like a camel pack on that I use pretty much everywhere I go with our water and stuff in it as we're walking around. And as we're walking around with my family, they have the Disney World security, and they have canines. And they're not officers, but they're security staff. And he comes right up to me with the dog. And he says, "Excuse me, sir, can I talk to you for a second?" I said, "Yeah, absolutely." He's like, "Do you have any firearms on you? Do you have any ammunition on you? Do you have anything on you at all?" And I'm like, No, I don't. He's like, he says, "Do you shoot firearms?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I actually do." I said, he says, "Well, my dog is trained to know when someone's carrying ammunition or carrying a firearm, and he's alerting to you." So, he wanted to go through my bag and look at me and talk to me. And I said, "Oh, actually, I bring this to the range. I do have firearms in it sometimes, but not right now." And, I didn't feel like my rights were violated. I didn't feel like, I was actually happy he was doing it. And I was impressed that the dog actually could pick me out of that crowd and come right over to me. So to me, that little inconvenience, maybe that person saves a shooting from happening in the parks someday. And I was just part of the process along the way, making sure that dog is on par with what he's supposed to be looking for.
What a great dog. Just the residual smell of firearms that you had at some point in that backpack. What a great dog.
That was amazing, actually.
Well, the Second Circuit in Brown versus Oneonta kind of addresses this issue when they say the people that are criticizing police officers are not speaking for their communities, who need police officers to make their communities safer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Ain't that the truth?
Ain't that the truth? Well, sir, thank you very much. I really appreciate your time. And Tom, as always, it's always great to talk to you as well. And
likewise.
How can people get in touch with you if they need you, sir?
Well, the best way to get in touch with me is I check my emails 7 days a week. And if you email me on Christmas, you'll get a return within 24 hours. I'm diligent. And it's E as in Elliot, B as in Bruce, Spector, SPECTOR 87 @gmail.com. So it was a pleasure doing this podcast. Tom, I'm going to see you in an in-person class coming year?
We were discussing that this afternoon, as a matter of fact. I'm looking at a venue that I may be able to get.
Okay. I love in-person classes. Thanks. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
You're welcome.
Bye-bye.